guest with us today. We have Mr. Lucas Holman, who is an extension agent in Wilson County, and he's a TSU agent. He's one of my co-workers there, and he has a wealth of knowledge in the horticultural realm of things. And so with that, I'm going to give it over to him. He really knows his stuff, so I hope that y'all enjoy his presentation.
Darby, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. I think we're just going to jump right in, and I'm going to mainly be talking about ornamentals in the landscape. So I kind of broke this up as ornamental flowering shrubs, and then I went through perennials, and then I went through my favorite trees. If you've got questions, I think they want you to put them in the chat box. So go ahead and put them in there whenever you think of them so that we can come back to them at the end, and then we will answer those after the presentation because I believe they are recording this. So let me go ahead and pull up my stuff. Hopefully y'all can see that. Darby, can you see that?
I can.
You can?
Yes, I can.
All right. I kind of wanted to start off with, since I'm a horticultural extension agent, what are the top questions that I get on plants every year? And that's what I'm going to focus on for just a little bit at the beginning. So I'm going to start off with some negatives, and I'm going to probably give you some cautions. So if you have these planted, or if you are looking to plant some of these in the future, they have some issues. So I kind of wanted to highlight, these were the top 5 plants that I've got calls on for probably 3 years in a row now. So I know it says 2019, but these again are starting to ride the rails again on 2020, and they were in 2018. And I'm going to go through each one kind of individually and talk about some of the issues that they have. Now, Leland cypress, we see them planted in a screen. We'll see 50 of them planted in a row. They are really susceptible to some diseases called Ceridium canker. And then once one gets it, and they're all touching in a row, what happens? It just goes right down the entire row. So we always recommend, if you're wanting to block out your neighbor, have a screen, mix it up some. Don't just put one solid species. And we see some nurseries now promoting different colors of Leland cypress. This was a cultivar called Gold Rider. It still has the same issues. So even though you think, well, this is a really neat one, this is going to be awesome in the landscape, it's still susceptible to those. So Leland cypress is not drought tolerant. We can go 8 or 9 weeks easily in the summertime without water. That's when they'll get kind of weak. They'll have a weakened immune system, and they will get this Ceridium canker. And probably Darby and all the other extension agents are the same way. This is probably the #1 plant we get calls on. And this is one plant that I tell people, just don't even plant. Because I was reading some research here recently, and it said the average lifespan of a Leland cypress in the landscape is only about 7 years. So we plant them, and we think they're going to be there forever, and that's not always the case. Autoleucon laurels are probably #2 of the plants that I get calls on. We see them used in hedges. The one issue, they're in the peach family. And if you have ever tried to grow peaches in Tennessee, they are not the easiest thing. So a lot of the peach problems are also going to kind of flop over to these little autoleucon laurels, these skip laurels. So peach borer is an insect that really hammers peaches pretty hard. It also hammers these laurels pretty well. Another way, and this is actually the easiest way to identify a laurel in the landscape. If you have an evergreen, it has longer strap-like leaves, go look for holes in the leaf. This is not an insect. This is a disease called shot hole, and you can spray for it, but you're going to be spraying about every 7 to 10 days. And I get so many calls on this. Well, what's eating it? What's eating it? It's not eating. It's a disease, and it's going to get it every year in Tennessee anyways. You're probably already seeing shot hole on your laurels right now. And for the most part, it doesn't kill it. It's just ugly. Pin oaks were probably #3, and we have some disease issues with them. The main one called bacterial leaf scorch, and it's actually a disease called Xylella. And what it does is it's spread by a bug, And we see pin oaks planted up and down driveways. And once one gets it, a leafhopper gets it in its gut, and it's going to go to the next one. It's going to go to the next one. It's going to go to the next one. The only issue with this bacterium, Xylella, once it's inside the plant, there's nothing you can do. It basically shuts off water flow, and within a few years, the plant will die. And this has kind of been the poster child for this disease. So you can kind of see the picture on the right has all those burnt edges around the edge. That's the sure sign in June, July, August that this is bacterial leaf scorch. And also the bottom leaves will completely fall off. Once it gets it, there's nothing else you can really do. And it also affects sycamores. It does affect other oaks, but I think for the most part, we see it on a lot of pin oaks because they were planted a lot in the 50s, the 60s, and the 70s. And these are huge trees now. And now they are starting to get it because they're in all these subdivisions. And this was a row in Mount Juliet. We saw pin oaks going up and down the driveway. And he had some that were already completely dead. And he was asking my suggestions. And I said, there's really not anything you can do for this. Once it gets inside the plant, it usually has an expiration date. If you know anything about roses right now, they have a little bit of a hard time. Roses are getting kind of wiped out, knocked out with a disease called rose rosette, and it's spread by an aerified mite, which kind of blows through the wind. So we see knockouts that look like this. They'll have new growth. It'll be twisted. It'll be red, and it'll have a ton of thorns up and down it. The only issue with this, since it's a virus also, once a plant gets it, it's not treatable. And it also can affect the wild multiflora roses. It can attack the grandiflora, floribunda, hybrid teas, drift roses, carpet roses, all the various roses. If it's a rose, it's susceptible to this. And I think the issue we have with this is we'll see parking lot berms of hotels, and they'll have 60 or 70 knockout roses. And once one gets it and all these knockouts are all touching, those mites are right there. So landscapers will dig up the disease-infected one, throw it away, boop, put another rose right back in its spot. Once you kind of have it in an area, usually the roses will kind of go away. I'm in Wilson County. We have knockout roses all around the square, and it's starting to affect them right now. We're starting to kind of see them go down because of rose rosette virus. And here's a picture from the Soil Pest and Plant Center. If you're not following them on Facebook, they have some great images that they share every day. That's on a wild multiflora rose, and it can affect any rose, just kind of showing you. The last plant that I get so many calls on is a Bradford pear. So I had a homeowner call and said, I want you to come look at my Bradford pear plant. I just don't know what's up with it. So I went to their home. This was in the wintertime. And they had recently bought this house, and they had a Bradford pear next to the house, and it had split. And the previous homeowner wrapped a chain and a come-along around that baby, and he ratcheted that baby back together, and it grew around the chain. And I thought, this is the most unique thing I've ever seen. So they said, what should we do? And I said, Bradford pears really only need to be cut one time at the ground. We see a lot of invasive tendencies with them. They are going to split. And we see people say, well, the Cleveland Select calorie pear is an improved Bradford pear. I don't know if I believe that or not. I think that might still be fake news. A lot of these ornamental flowering pears just have weak branches, and they're known to split. A couple of other negative posts before we jump into some of my favorite ornamentals. If you're watching crepe myrtles and you love crepe myrtles in your lawn, in your yard, watch for this little bug called crepe myrtle bark scale. It popped up in Wilson County a couple of years ago, and it looks like snow all over the branches. And it'll kind of take one down pretty fast. So you'll see all the leaves turn black, and you'll see all this white scale insect all over the bark. But I think a lot of our issues, now I'm going to kind of jump into my favorite plants. So I kind of talked about the ones that have issues. We have a lot of plants. If you just put them in the right spot, they're going to thrive and do well anyways. There are some plants that are so easy to grow, but they just got to be given the right type of growing conditions. For this one right here, this is a hosta at a hotel parking lot in the full sun, are surrounded by concrete that was burning all summer long. Hostas, they are usually one of the easiest plants to grow if you give them shade. So I think before we kind of jump into putting new plants around our home, we need to see what we're dealing with first. Are we dealing with sun, which is more than 6 hours of sun a day, or are we dealing with shade, which is less than 4? If you've got that middle range, 4 to 6 hours of sun, shade, it can be considered part sun, part shade, kind of depending on where the evening sun is. So before you go to the nursery, the garden center, the box store, and buy anything, limit yourself. Just say, well, the front of my house is what I'm going to focus on right now. I've only got full sun. And when you go to the garden center, you need to only buy full sun plants. Don't buy some of these beautiful shade looking plants. They'll sell them to you, but you need to buy. I'm shooing away flies as I talk, but they're not sure what you're dealing with at your house. So if you just give the right type of growing conditions to these plants, they will do 1,000 times better. It's when we stress out these plants, they get a weakened immune system. And when these disease, these insects, these bacteria, these viruses are floating through the air, that's when they get them, when they're weak. We also see some plants that probably should not be used at all in the landscape. This was for sale for a few years. This is a beautiful variegated vine that some nurseries were promoting. This is variegated kudzu. Could you imagine planting kudzu in your landscape bed, not really knowing what it was? It was called Sherman's Revenge kudzu, but people saw it and they thought, well, that'll be a beautiful vine to put on my arbor near my house. This will take over your situation, your house, your arbor, whatever it may be. Think about the plants before you buy them. Oh, terrible choice of a plant, a variegated kudzu. Oh, this would be like planting more privet, or I have seen a nursery now selling a golden poison ivy. Whew, I'm a plant nerd. I'll be honest. I love plants. Some of that is far more extreme than what I ever want to deal with. All right. I broke this up. So those are some of the negatives. Just watch out for some of those things. Let's give these plants the right type of sunshade that they need. As we go through this, these are all the flowering shrubs that I love, and I'm watching my time also. Hydrangea paniculatas are really the only full sun loving hydrangeas that we see on the market right now. We call them panicle hydrangeas. Generally, they are the white ones. They can come in some pink colors now. But UT, the gardens in Jackson, ran by Jason Reeves. He planted 70 or 80 different kinds of hydrangeas in full sun to see which ones did the best. And I kind of highlighted the ones that I absolutely loved. The first one, beautiful, stocky little plant, kind of a conical type bloom, was baby lace. One that I put at my last house, these are all full sun loving hydrangeas, is little lime. So for probably the past 20 or 25 years, limelight, was the standard hydrangea for landscapes. The only problem with limelight, it can get 9, 10, 11 feet tall, and we had it put right next to the house. Ideally, if we put the right tree, the right shrub next to the house, we really shouldn't have to do a lot of pruning. And I see people, they'll say, cut, 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 cut. I'm a lazy gardener. I have beds around my house I'm looking at right now. I don't put something there really that I'm going to have to cut every year because I'm lazy. So little lime is actually the dwarf version of limelight. So limelight, 10 feet tall max. Little lime, 5 to 6 feet tall. One, if you've got a huge area that would look fantastic, and this one approaches 10 feet tall, this is Phantom. This is at my mother's house. I planted one probably 15 years ago. That's a giant reed grass in the background. The blooms on this thing are the largest blooms on any paniculata hydrangea on the market today. They can get to be the size of a girl's basketball. So if you're looking for a big hydrangea that's going to get 10 feet tall, 10 feet wide, that you have the room to put, and you want to show off on your block, plant a Phantom hydrangea. As the blooms, they open up white, they kind of fade to a lighter pink. Another shorter one that gets anywhere from 6 to 8 feet tall is Silver Dollar. So limelight, little lime kind of has a green sheen to them. Silver Dollar is more of a white color. So kind of looking at some of the other hydrangeas, so all those hydrangeas were full sun-loving hydrangeas. If we're looking for more shade hydrangeas, this oak leaf hydrangea called Ruby Slippers. Now this picture was taken in West Tennessee. They prefer shade. Oak leaf hydrangeas are native to Tennessee, so they're pretty easy to grow. The blooms open up, excuse me. The blooms open up white and they kind of fade to a pink. But it is probably the brightest pink of any oak leaf hydrangea on the market today. Gets anywhere from 6 to 8 feet tall. Of all the oak leaf hydrangeas, my favorite one is called Little Honey. Little Honey is the only one that has a bright yellow foliage. It's not the most florific. So we see some hydrangeas that have beautiful foliage, but they don't have the most flowers. Little Honey is not really known for its flowers. It's known for actually being the only yellow oak leaf hydrangea. It prefers more shade. If you give it a lot of sun, the issue is it will burn. Here was one a couple of years ago at a high school I was teaching at. We used to do all the landscaping around the beds. We planted this little honey oak leaf hydrangea about 5 years ago, and I got to see it last year. And it was about 5 feet tall, 5 feet wide, beautiful yellow foliage, but don't give it too much sun. Another oak leaf hydrangea, if you're looking for a big one, the blooms are so long, 16, 18-inch long blooms, panicles. They can actually hang down and it looks like the plant's weeping. This one's called Snowflake. This picture was taken at Cheekwood a few years ago. It was probably an 8 or 9 feet tall plant, but all the blooms were just so heavy, they were just kind of weeping over. Beautiful plant. And I think this is the last hydrangea before we jump into some other plants. This is another one that's a native one. This one's called Hydrangea arborescens, which is a smooth hydrangea. This is the one that we see next to creek beds. We see a lot of it in the Smokies. The most popular Hydrangea arborescens is called Annabelle, and I'm sure some of you have Annabelle hydrangeas at your house. Now, this one is the only double flowering one that I know of, called Hayes Starburst. Stays a little bit smaller, 4 to 5 feet tall, 4 to 5 feet wide. All right. Hopefully, that's actually a typo. It's supposed to be Caenomyle speciosa. These are actually my favorite quinces on the market now. A lot of the older flowering quinces that we have had issues. They had thorns, and they got so big, so rampant, we really couldn't do a whole lot with them. So a guy in North Carolina took a thornless one called Dragon's Blood and started breeding thornless quinces. So he released this whole series called Double Take Scarlet Storm, Double Take Pink Storm, Double Take Orange Storm, and there's actually a Double Take Peach Storm now. But these are what they look like. But showing you the size difference in these flowers, the new ones are actually the bottom picture right there. The top is the old flowering quinces that we see in old homesteads where the houses are gone, but the flowering quinces are still there. They have thorns. The bottom one is Double Take Orange Storm. The blooms are about 4 or 5 times the size of these older flowering quinces that we had in our landscape. I love butterfly bushes, and out of all the plants, they're probably some of the most forgiving because they seem to be the most drought tolerant. In Crossville, they have the Trial Gardens, the Plateau Research Center, and I got to go visit them last August, and these butterfly bushes in August, for the most part, we don't see a lot of great-looking shrubs in August because they got beat up by July, and this was late August and the beginning of August heat. This Buzz series, this one was called Buzz Hot Raspberry, and this one was called Buzz Ivory. They were standouts in the garden at that time. The blooms were held upright, and if you look at the labels, it says anywhere from 36 to 48 inches tall, so 3 to 4 feet tall, 3 to 4 feet wide. And you talk about bringing in pollinators, these really bring in the pollinators. Physocarpus, we also know by another name called nine barks. Now, these are also native shrubs to Tennessee, but we've got a lot of great cultivars coming out. Now, my dad is not a gardener. He's a rough guy. He's got a kind of a big burly guy, wears overalls. He is not a plant guy at all. He's a machinist. So I planted all these various shrubs at my mom and daddy's house over the years, and I said, "What's your favorite shrub I have ever planted at your house?" And he pointed to this one. He said, "I like that one right there." I said, "You like that one?" I said, "Why do you like it?" He said, in the springtime, he said, every branch is covered with 1,000 blooms, and it is. It looks like snow on top of this plant. They have kind of a purple foliage. There's a lot of different cultivars now. I believe this one was called Copertina. We've seen Center Glow. Diablo is an older one. They all kind of have purplish foliage. But in the springtime, man, you could not beat the flowers that are covered all over the branches of this thing. And here was another one. I believe this one was called Center Glow. This was at Mom and Daddy's house. Huge purple shrub. If you've got the space, probably 8 or 10 feet tall over time. This is my favorite new plant that has come on the market the past couple of years. I took this picture at the UT Gardens in Knoxville. This little spirea is called double play candy corn. And as I was kind of walking through some of the beds, this plant just drew my eye to it because it looked like someone took a highlighter and threw it in the landscape because it just draws your eye to it. The new foliage is kind of a coppery red color. The older foliage is that yellow color. And it has beautiful pink blooms that last on it all summer long. So it blooms off and on all summer long. So if you're looking for something that's one of those plants that's like, look at me, look at me. This is that plant that you need to be planting in full sun. Another full sun spirea that doesn't get enough attention is called Spirea thunbergii ogon. We also see it sold under another name called mellow yellow. This is a beautiful big yellow spirea that kind of has beautiful white flowers all through the springtime. So sometimes you'll see it and you'll think, that's that old bridal veil spirea. And it is. It's in the same plant family, Spirea. Beautiful yellow plant. You can see this was growing in Jackson, Tennessee, next to a parking lot. And you know, Jackson's can be a pretty warm place in the summertime. This plant was thriving in full sun next to a concrete parking lot. Kind of moving on to some of our perennials that I really like. Amsonia hubrichtii is known by quite a few names, but Amsonia won an award a few years ago for Perennial Plant of the Year. It has soft foliage. In the fall time, it turns a beautiful orange color in the landscape, and they can get anywhere 4 or 5 feet wide, 4 or 5 feet tall. But if you're looking for something to kind of add a soft texture to the landscape, look up this Perennial Plant of the Year, Amsonia hubrichtii. There are a lot of different cultivars of Amsonia now, and one of them stays really squat to the ground called Georgia Pancake. And I haven't grown it yet, so we'll see what it looks like in a couple of years when I'm able to find it. Going through full sun in Tennessee, I love daylilies. I think everybody needs to have them because if you're trying to encourage gardeners, you're trying to encourage kids, daylilies are easy to grow, they're forgiving, and they really do thrive in Tennessee without a whole lot of water. I have quite a few various ones, but I want you to know that daylilies come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. So the one on the left was called Notify Ground Crew, and it's a 6 feet tall daylily. So this is not one that you want to put in a really small spot in the front of a landscape, but it needs to go in the back. The one on the right got about 3.5, 4 feet tall, and it was called Toy Trumpets. So, but we do have some daylilies that only get about 15 inches tall, and then we have those that get right over 6 feet tall. So if you're trying to find various spots in some of your flower beds and you're wanting something tall, try some of these taller ones out, but just kind of showing you the diversity that daylilies come in now. They come in the old orange ditch lily, and I'm sure some of you got some in your ditches and on your property, called Hemerocallis fulva. Now, that orange daylily was brought over by colonists. It's not native here. It was brought over as an edible plant because you can saute the buds in a buttery sauce, and it supposedly has the taste of green beans. I'm not going to eat daylily buds because I want to see the flowers more than I want to eat them. And I got green beans to eat anyways. But just showing you, a lot of newer daylilies now are really showy. They're flashy, and they all still do well in full sun. Here's a couple of other ones. But if you're looking for any color of daylily other than a true white and a true blue, you could probably find it. And there are a ton of daylily farms all across Tennessee that you can buy these from. So if you're really interested in daylilies, look up the American Daylily Society. In Tennessee, if you're a gardener, you have got to plant iris. That's our state flower, and it's been our state flower for almost 40 years now. But I think we don't realize the amount of species of iris. There's almost 200 species, but hybrids alone, there's tens of thousands of hybrids available. And we have societies dedicated just to the iris, just like we do the Daylily Society. These were some that I grew a few years ago that were just fantastic. The one on the left was called Spend Thrift, and the one on the right was called Yellow Spoon, and it had these weird protrusions that actually come out of the middle of the petal. A couple of other ones, the one on the left and the one on the right are two different species of iris. The one on the left is actually a bearded iris, which are probably the most common iris that we have around Tennessee. And the one on the right is called a Louisiana iris. Even though it says Louisiana iris, they still do fine in Tennessee. Some of these Louisiana iris are the type that we can see in kind of a wetter area in the beds, but I grew them just fine in some of my landscape beds in my previous properties in kind of my drier side of my house. It was morning sun, afternoon shade. They did fine. Louisianas are beautiful iris. A couple of other iris. The one on the left again is the one that we're most used to, called the bearded iris. The one on the right is our native iris called Iris cristata. We see this in the woods. We see this along streams. We see it around rocky areas that kind of stay rich and humus and they're wet. This is Iris cristata, only gets about 4 or 5 inches tall. I laid on the ground and took this picture because it is a beautiful iris. And if it has the right type of growing conditions, shade, that's one of the few irises that prefer shade, and it has kind of a moist type environment, it will make a carpet. And in the springtime, it will be covered with all over these little bitty purplish, bluish flowers. While the tall bearded iris prefer full sun. So before you plant the iris, make sure you know which one you got and make sure you know you're going to put it in the right spot. Some of you may curse me because this plant, spiderwort or tradescantia, can be a little bit weedy sometimes, but I like to kind of let it go in the landscape. This is Tradescantia Sweet Kate. Sweet Kate is the yellow flower, or it's the yellow foliage form of an older form of spiderwort. Now, spiderworts come in purples and whites and pinks. This one is blue. And the way the flowers open up blue against that golden foliage, it's a great contrast. These prefer morning sun, afternoon shade, and the flowers usually close up when it gets real hot. Another plant about 2 years ago that was perennial of the year was a flowering onion called allium. That's the genus of onions, called Millennium. And it got about 16 or 18 inches tall, and it flowers pretty much off and on all summer long. And really, I can't think of any diseases that some of these flowering onions get. Deer, I don't believe, eat these flowering onions. So if you've got a lot of deer issues in your landscape, I would venture to say they're probably not going to eat a lot of your flowering onions because of the strong pungency of the taste. Beautiful little plant that needs to go in the front of the landscape bed. Some cannas are just hardier than others. Some come back every year and some will die in the wintertime. One of the hardiest ones that I've seen for Tennessee, and I've even seen it come back in Zone 6, which is closer to the Cumberland Plateau, is Bengal tiger. Beautiful orange flowers on top of a variegated yellow foliage. But once this thing gets started, it will really run pretty well. So if you've got a smaller area and you're trying to keep it contained, you're going to probably be digging and dividing it every couple of years. But just kind of let it go. If you've got the area, it makes a beautiful bed in the summertime. We lack in plants sometimes that bloom in the fall time. Asters, a lot of the asters bloom generally in later summer, September, October. This one specifically was called October Skies, and you can see a little bit of the yellow solidago or goldenrod on the right side of that plant. This was part of a native plant bed, asters. We have some native asters. This October Skies is a hybrid of an aster, and they made giant pillows in the landscape that pretty much bloomed most of the fall because we're lacking in things that bloom in the fall time, and we got to think about our pollinators in the fall time. But plant taxonomists have changed the name of aster. It's been aster for a couple of hundred years. they have changed the name aster to something that rolls off the tongue a lot easier, and it's called Symphyotrichum. And I didn't put that down because nobody's going to know what that is yet. It just popped up over the last year or two that they have changed the name of aster to Symphyotrichum. But just tell people you're looking for an aster instead of a Symphyotrichum. Ridiculous. All right, in Tennessee, if you got full sun, we have great selections of coneflowers that do well. We have some that bloom orange. We have some red ones. We have some pink ones, white ones, purple ones, yellow ones. I'm probably missing some colors in every shade in between those. And what's a benefit about these coneflowers is once they kind of reseed in some of the beds, they come back all the various colors. So you can kind of see we've got some purple popping up here. We have some white. There's some orange, which I think in this bed at my mother's house, the original clump was orange, and some of the other ones just kind of reseeded around the beds. And coneflowers are great in the wintertime. Leave those seed pods up for birds to eat in the wintertime. Don't clean up your beds until all the seed pods are gone. A series that was grown from seed that's done pretty well in Tennessee is called Cheyenne Spirit. Now, Cheyenne Spirit is a mixture of seeds that are red, yellow, white, orange, purple, and every shade in between. So if you call a company and a perennial nursery and like, I want 10 Cheyenne Spirit coneflower, theoretically you can get 10 different colors. It's a seed-grown series, but they seem to do pretty well. So some of the newer hybrids, they're not as hardy as some of the seed-born ones, so kind of keep that in mind. So some of the newer ones that are $18 or $20 a piece, if you let them bloom on a really small plant, they're not going to come back next year because their whole goal in life is to bloom. If you prevent them from blooming the first year, I think they're going to do better the second year. Another seed-grown series that's done well in Tennessee is Pow Wow. So you have a series called Pow Wow Wildberry, which is this one. You have a series called Pow Wow Wildberry White, which is the same thing, but it's white. And what's the kind of the selling point on these coneflowers is they bloom the first year from seed. Sometimes coneflowers, a lot of the older ones, take 2 years to bloom from seed. And also, if you look at these newer coneflowers, man, they are packed with flowers on there. So some of the older ones, Magnus, Kim's Knee High, White Swan, some of the older cultivars, they're kind of longer, they're leggier, and they have just a few blooms at top. This Powwow series is killer when it comes to flowers. This is another one of those plants, kind of like spiderwort, that if it's really happy where it's at, it's going to probably spread a little bit in your beds. But we lack blue in the garden, and sometimes we need to have some blue plants in our garden. And what's unique about this one is the flowers are long and skinny and they're half black and they're half blue. That's why it's called salvia black and blue. But if you're trying to attract hummingbirds to your property, use these tubular shaped flowers such as this one and some of the other salvias that have long red, long white, long pink type flowers, and you will really bring in the hummingbirds. This salvia is perennial. We have some species of salvias that are not hardy in Tennessee, so kind of do your research about that. And if you got any questions about any salvias, be sure to holler. Out of all the plants that I'm going to talk about today, if you can't grow sedums in your garden, you probably need to find a new hobby. Sedums are easy to grow, they're forgiving, and they kind of run rampant over the beds. And what I like about this Angelina sedum, it's also great weed suppressant in the bed. So if you've got big open spots in your flower beds around your house, throw some Angelina sedum in those spots and just watch them take over the beds. They're not going to keep things down. So you can see in this picture, the iris are coming up through the Angelina sedum right now. But I like Angelina sedum too because it's pretty much evergreen in Tennessee. So in the wintertime, it kind of turns a coppery color, orange color. In the spring, it turns yellow and it blooms. And then it kind of goes to a lime-ish color in the summertime. So, and if you want to move it, just take a clump of it somewhere, throw it in another bed, and step on it. It's pretty simple to grow. It roots real easy. You may throw a little soil on top of it to get it started. But if you tell me, well, I just can't grow that Angelina sedum, I think you need to find some other avenues of hobbies. Maybe woodworking is your thing. A plant, I love clematis. Some clematis have problems in Tennessee. This one right here is not the best climbing one. It's more of a sprawling type. It's called Ragucci. Now, Ragucci is a clematis integrifolia hybrid. It will run up some things, but you really have to tie it and tie it and tie it and stay on top of it. What I love about it is a couple years ago, I had some running through some beds. I tried to train it on an arbor, and it just kept kind of growing down, growing down. And I just ripped the arbor out, and I just let it run through my beds, and it did fantastic. I like it because it has beautiful bluish bell-shaped flowers, and it blooms pretty much all summer long. A lot of the older flowering forms of clematis only bloom pretty much once or twice this summer, and then you're done. This one right here, even though the flowers are smaller, maybe 2 inches, it'll bloom pretty much all summer long. Now, this is a killer vine, and I mentioned salvia black and blue if you're trying to bring in hummingbirds. This one called Major Wheeler honeysuckle blooms pretty much all summer long. We have some at our Wilson County Fairgrounds. It started blooming a couple of months ago, and this picture was taken during our fair in August, so 3 or 4 months of bloom. But this thing will get big. Now, some forms of honeysuckle, Lonicera japonica, that old Japanese honeysuckle, you do not want. This one is a Lonicera sempervirens, which is our native honeysuckle, and it does awesome, but make sure you give it plenty of room, and it will reward you with a ton of blooms, and it will bring in those hummingbirds. I never thought I would see the day that I would promote a monkey grass. We see the old dark green monkey grass. We see that variegated yellow monkey grass. This one right here is a straight yellow one. It's not a running type. Some of the older ones will run all through your beds, and you would regret planting them after a couple of years. This one clumps, and it stays yellow, and it has purple flowers on top of that yellow foliage. This one's called PD Gold Ingot. It does fine in full sun, and it does fine in part sun, part shade. Here's another picture of it in full sun. It does kind of get that bleached out color, but I love it. And whenever I moved to my new house last year, one of the first plants I planted in front of my house in the bed was this PD Gold Ingot monkey grass, Loriope. Beautiful plant. Kind of going on through, so I started with some of the grasses just a second ago. This has a terrible name, but it's a beautiful plant. It's called Hackanachoa. If you have shade and you're trying to add color to shade, add this Hackanachoa. It's also known as Japanese forest grass. And here's another color of it. I believe this one was called Albo striatum, and it was just a variegated form, but it looks like waves actually coming out of the shady spots in the landscape. Another grass that I love, I believe this is the one perennial plant of the year also, panicum, which is switchgrass. So we see a lot of people using switchgrass in pastures now. This one right here stays like a tight column. So if you have some places in your landscape that you want something 4 feet tall, 1 or 2 feet wide that just goes straight up, this switchgrass called Northwind does fantastic. This was kind of walking up to a flagpole at a high school. If you fertilize this, if you water it, if you take care of it, it's going to flop. This thrives on neglect. Don't fertilize this stuff. Most switchgrasses that we see in pastures, they are not taken care of really well. A shade plant that is native to Tennessee that is starting to bloom right now that people are posting pictures of on Facebook saying, what is this beautiful plant we see in the woods? This is called Spigelia or Indian Pinks. It's hard to find in some nurseries, but if you have a shady spot and you're able to find this from a nursery or a retail place, mail order, buy 1 or 2. Gets about 16 or 18 inches tall, and in the summertime, the blooms look like fireworks exploding in the landscape. Shade only. Kind of moving on with some of those grass-like plants. Now, this is a carex, which is actually a sedge, but it's a grass look-alike. Everillo, beautiful yellow grass-type plant in the landscape. This was morning sun, afternoon shade. I love these yellow plants because I think they draw your eye to it. This was another carex. No, this was Acorus, which is actually another type of sedge. This one is called Dwarf Golden Sweet Flag. So if you've got a spot in between a building and your garage maybe that stays wet, shady, and moist, and you can't get anything to grow there, this dwarf golden sweet flag will grow fine there. It gets about 3 or 4 inches tall and it makes a carpet. Here's another picture of it used in between some buildings where nothing else would really grow. This will do fine. Another shade plant, that Chinese wild ginger, Asarum splendens. I think sometimes we think we're limited on shade, that we can only grow hostas, begonias, and impatiens. No, I'm trying to show you we have a lot of diversity now in shade plants, and this Chinese wild ginger, beautiful, silvery looking leaf. But one of my favorites for shade are these Japanese painted ferns. And there are a lot of different cultivars out there now. This one's just called Pictum. And if you're trying to, you can't really see in the picture, but it's along a stone wall. It's actually grew out of the stone wall a little bit at the bottom. They are really easy to grow in shade, shade, shade. One plant that you may have seen at some gardens in shade that you're not sure what it is, this is Aurelia Sun King. And it almost looks like it would be a shrub, but it's actually a perennial. It dies completely back to the ground. We have some Aurelias that are native to Tennessee. You may know that old spiny shrub in some of the woods called Devil's Walking Stick. This is in the same family, but it does not have any spines on it. Ain't got any thorns on it. Beautiful yellow plant. Kind of wrapping up, I've got just a few more plants. I got a few more time. So hopefully if you've got any questions, make sure you're putting those in the chat box, and we'll get to those in just a minute. Another plant, if you've got some big concrete pots somewhere and you're trying to grow something in that you can't run the water hose to, this yucca color guard looks great. And it also looks great when you're mixing it with other colors. I don't like some of the older native type yuccas. They can kind of run rampant all over the place. This one is a little bit more tidier and it stays more kept. Wrapping up just a few other plants, I wanted to hit on a few conifers because we see a lot of people wanting evergreens in the landscape. They want junipers. They want something that kind of looks good for most of the year. This juniper, called Dobbs Frosted, only gets about 10 or 12 inches tall, but it gets a beautiful carpet on the ground. So we see some junipers that people plant in the landscape, they get way too big and they're having to cut. If we use some of these more creeping type junipers, we're not going to have to cut. Dobbs Frosted is a variegated form. And I mentioned earlier that when I moved to my new house last year, that PD Gold monkey grass was one of the first plants I planted. Another one I planted was this juniper called All Gold, and it's in a species called Conferta. It gets about a foot and a half feet tall, but it also makes a beautiful yellow carpet, full sun juniper that really, I can't think of a lot of disease issues with it, and I love that juniper. If you've got some corners to your house, and we see people planting river birches, we see people planting little gem magnolias, we see people planting the wrong plants in the wrong spots. Some of these plants that get way too big. And I've had people say, well, I've got these little gem magnolias. They're 4 feet from my house. They'll get 15 feet over time. That's just a terrible spot to put a plant. We use some of these skinnier plants around the beds of the house. They'll do a lot better. This arbor vitae gets 2 or 3 feet wide and about 10 or 12 feet tall. It looks like a giant telephone pole in your bed. So if you're trying to find something to put at the corner of your house that's not going to run in your gutters, that's not going to kind of that could hurt the foundation of your house, like some of these larger trees they plant, this arbor vitae DeGroot spire would be great. Another one is Taylor cedar. Now, juniperus is the plant family for a ton of different junipers. Our eastern red cedar, which is what we see growing on the side of the interstate and in ditches and in fence rows all across Middle Tennessee. This one is the same thing, but it was a very columnar one that stays really tight and it gets really tall. This is another one of those plants. If you've got a driveway or if you're going to put something in front of your behind your mailbox to kind of draw people's attention to it, this Taylor juniper is great. It's real tight and it gets real tall. But it's our eastern red cedar. Really, nothing bothers that thing. That's probably the plant that people need to be using in these hedges instead of Leland cypress is eastern red cedar. If you're looking for a beautiful flowering magnolia, this one also goes by two names, but this is Sweet Bay Magnolia called Maddie Mae Smith. Maddie Mae Smith also goes by the name called Mardi Gras. It's the only variegated one that I can think of. It has beautiful white flowers in early summer. They're blooming right now with that kind of sweet scent. But what we love about this magnolia is the variegation on the leaf. And for the most part, these Sweet Bay magnolias are generally evergreen in Tennessee unless we go through a really hard winter. Then they'll drop their leaves, but then they'll come back out. But for the past few years, these have been evergreen. So now that I say that, next year we're going to have record low temperatures, and everybody's Sweet Bay magnolias are all going to get defoliated in the wintertime. Darby, that's what I've got today.
Thank you, Lucas. I don't think I've seen anything in the chat box right now, but we'll open it up if anybody has any questions on that. I know something that I get a lot in the office is people will ask me about the best ones for, the lower pHs, acid level. You have a favorite that you would?
Well, and I can only think of a few plants that kind of thrive in lower pH, and that would be the azaleas and rhododendrons. They need shade, though. We see a lot of work being done with ornamental blueberries. Blueberries kind of prefer a pH of 4.8 to 5.2, but we see some of the newer series of blueberries. There's one called Summer Sunset, and it's mostly bred to be a landscape plant now. And I've seen some blueberries planted in some of the landscapes at TSU in Nashville, and they prefer those lower pH. But we're seeing a lot of people use them in landscape beds also because they're edible. They have fall, beautiful foliage that turns red, and they have white flowers in the springtime. Blueberries are a great landscape plant if we get some of the shorter ones. Does anybody else have any questions?
Yeah, hey Lucas, this is Kevin Rose. You talk about a lot of these plants, and some of us don't have great access to, folks that sell them naturally. Nurseries. We got a guy down here, and he kind of on and off closing. He's got some things, but if we're talking to folks out here in the country, where can we direct folks to?
And I'll be honest, I have a hard time finding some of them without having to drive to McMinnville or having to drive to Nashville. And a lot of these plants, if you just go to the same garden center every year, you're probably not going to find some of these things. But I wanted to highlight some of the things that if you were able to find them, it would be great. Now, what's great is the UT Gardens in Crossville, Knoxville, and Jackson has plant sales, usually a spring plant sale, a summer plant sale, and a fall plant sale. So a lot of the plants that I mentioned are doing great in the UT Gardens, and then they sell them sporadically throughout the year. So they will do a lot of advertising at some of the gardens if you were able to get out there. Now, I know Jackson is probably 4 hours for me. I usually go over there once a year to their plant sale to go pick up some of these more obscure plants. But sometimes a lot of mail order nurseries, there are a lot of really neat perennial nurseries online, but I want to encourage you to use a website called Garden Watchdog. If you're going to buy something from a nursery online, look at Garden Watchdog because they will give reviews of these mail order plant nurseries because some of them have terrible reviews. And before you go spend money online, research the place. So a lot of these plants can be found online. Now, depending on the trees and shrubs, you may not be able to find them just because of the size.
Hey, Lucas, this is Michael
When
Berry.
does Jackson?
Do what, Kevin?
Well, one follow-up. When does Jackson usually have their sale?
They usually have theirs the second Thursday in July. This year it's moved to October, and I think it's the first Thursday in October, but I have to look that up because I don't remember. They're calling it Fall Celebration this year. They usually have Summer Celebration. It got canceled, so they've moved it to October sometime. They have a lot of guest speakers, but they their plant sale has a nice following, and it starts usually pretty early, and the line is usually pretty long.
Thanks.
Hey, Lucas. This is Michael Berry.
Hey,
Talking about Leland cypress for a windbreak, what are some good alternative plants, trees that we could recommend?
probably 3 or 4 that do great, and I would like to see them in a mixed screen. Foster hollies do fine, and I've got some Foster hollies here on my property that are probably 30 or 40 years old that nobody has taken care of that do fine. Arborvitaes do well. The only problem with arborvitaes is you will get bagworms at some point, so that's why we don't recommend a ton of arborvitaes in a row. So the Foster hollies, and I will say American hollies do fine too. The what did I just say? Arborvitaes will do fine if they're in the mixed screen. Another one that I've seen that I kind of like in some of these is Arizona cypress. Now, Arizona cypress seem to be more drought tolerant than Leland cypress. You think of the name Arizona cypress. Little gem magnolias, they're a little bit of a smaller stature shrub tree form, I guess. They do fine. So in a mixed screen, so that's probably one of the top questions I get every year, Michael, is, well, what plants can I put in a screen that do well? I like the southern magnolias. I like the arborvitaes. I like the hollies. I like the Arizona cypress. I like some of these larger viburnums that get 10 or 12 feet tall. So people will always say, I want it fast growing. The faster something grows, the faster it's going to die. So Bradford pears, they grow real fast. They have a weak woody system. They'll split. Leland cypress grows real fast. They'll die. So I know it's terrible. I encourage people to find some of these slower growing things. I think they do better. I like that little gem magnolia in a mixed screen also. So that's 4 or 5 plants, Michael, that would do fine in a mixed screen.
Yeah, I appreciate that because that's one of our more common questions is with those. And of course, they're calling when they're dead and they want something that same size immediately. Or
I know they're working on a publication with UT on screen plantings. Don't know where the status of that is right now. So hopefully that will be released sometime this year. I've seen edits of it. Anybody else have any questions?
Lucas, in the chat box, you've got a question. What about camellia? Would love a winter bloomer.
Camellias, there's a series called the Ackerman hybrids, and I don't believe they are the winter blooming type, but out of all the camellias, UT Gardens in Jackson trialed a bunch of camellias, and the ones that seem to have the name April in the name seem to do better than a lot of the winter blooming camellias. So camellias are really not a great plant for Tennessee. Now UT Gardens, they use their money to trial them. Don't use your money to trial some of these plants. See what plants the UT Gardens have killed in the past, and you may look for some of. I don't believe the Ackerman hybrids are doing well, but I've heard people talk about one called Winter. I think it was called Winter Trist. No, April Trist. That supposedly does well in Tennessee, but I don't believe it's a winter flowering camellia. I don't see a lot of luck with camellias in Tennessee. I'm sorry. What's a winter bloomer, non-camellia recommended bloomer that is? Winter jasmine. And winter jasmine kind of blooms at late winter. If you're looking for more of a shrub that kind of blooms toward the end of winter. And also look up a plant that's called paper bush, and they always sell it every year at the Nashville Lawn and Garden Show. It's under the Latin name called Edgeworthia. It has a beautiful scent, but it blooms generally about February on a plant that has no leaves and has a beautiful little white flower that hangs upside down. So winter jasmine blooms in late winter, and Edgeworthia, aka paper bush, blooms in late winter. So that's 2 plants for you, Keith, that would bloom in late winter.
I have one question for you. I get a lot of calls in about gardenias.
Gardenias are really sensitive to pH also. The issue with gardenias, even though the name of them will be Clem's hardy. That does not mean they're hardy in Tennessee. I don't see a lot of people have a lot of luck with them, mostly out of the hardiness factor. I think most of them are zone 7 hardy. They would do fine in Memphis. They're probably not going to do fine in Middle Tennessee. And we're right on the edge of hardiness. So depending on the winter, you may have a successful year with them one year, and it's because we had a mild winter. Then the next year we could have a zone 6 winter, and we stay in single digits for a week, and then that'll usually knock them out completely. I get some questions on camellias, and I think they have some pH issues also. But I think the problem with camellias is the winter hardiness issue.
All right. Do we have any other questions for Lucas?
Well, I appreciate y'all's time today.
Well, thank you very much for coming and joining us and sharing your knowledge and expertise. And we really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me. And if anybody here has any questions, y'all you can email me or you can call my office or whatever. Maybe easiest to email me right now, and then we'll get you taken care of. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Lucas.